Welcome to Minority Crimes, the show that shines a light on crimes that are often overlooked. We are your hosts. I am
And
Jonna
I am Stawana
Stallings.
Dassery.
Today we're talking about who we are, our why, and what you can expect from this show. Make sure you listen all the way through to hear about some of our most memorable experiences as prosecutors in the country's third largest district attorney's office.
Oftentimes, crimes against marginalized individuals are not highlighted or given the same media attention as other crimes. And we know as prosecutors, no attention, little resources, cold cases. So we hope through this podcast to give our listeners a platform to call in, write us, and give us any tips or information about any of the cases that we talk about on the podcast in hopes to provide comfort, a sense of closure and justice to the victim's family, and to give a voice to the victim who's oftentimes not heard. So, Jonna, let's talk about some of the light stuff and tell our listeners a little bit about your personal background.
Sure. I actually am from St. Louis. I live in Austin, Texas right now, but I'm originally from St. Louis. Grew up there until I was 7, moved to Highland, Illinois when I was 7, and lived there until I was 18. Highland's a very small town, like 3,000 people. And I pretty much have spent most of my life working. I started working when I was 10 at the local
Wow.
library and then started babysitting and then worked at McDonald's and did a lot of work as a kid. That really informed my work ethic. And I ended up getting pregnant when I was 20 and was still able to finish college, even though in a town of 3,000 people, how people talk, they kind of wrote me off as, well, she's done. I still finished college and went to law school. So that's kind of just in a nutshell how and where I grew up. My dad ran a local grocery store when I was a kid. Was a working class guy, super hard worker, didn't go to college. And so I was raised with that work ethic, work hard and do good. How about you,
Well, first of
Stawana?
all, Jonna, that makes a lot of sense why we get along so well. I knew most of your story, but not the part about always working. I can attest to working at a young age. And I think that's where, like you said, it really builds your work ethic, right? I grew up in New Orleans, Louisiana. I grew up in the 7th Ward. The neighborhood I came from was crime ridden. It was normal for me to go to bed with the sounds of gunshots. I was living a nightmare versus fairy tales as a young girl. So it kind of shaped me into who I am. I always say that, when I was growing up poor, I never knew I was poor because my mother always instilled in us that it's not where you're from, it's how you live. And the way she lived in our household was to instill in us the importance of education, the importance of your word is your bond, that's all you have, and the importance of working hard because nothing comes to a sleeper but a dream. And she would say, if you're going to dream it, you must be it. And so for me, I started working at a snowball stand when I was 15 years old. But before that, I was a mini entrepreneur. I would sell candy. My dad, who was a local mechanic, he would get credit at the local stores. And when they saw me, they would give me candy on my dad's credit. And I would take that candy, go to school and sell it. So I was a hustler at a young age, hustling candies and little lollipops and Boston baked beans. And so from there, from the snowball stand at 15, went to a performing arts school at NOCA, which is New Orleans Centers for Creative Arts. That's why I really had my love for the arts. And I know you love arts as well. I see that beautiful painting behind you. I'm wondering, is that one of your paintings? It is.
It
Wow. Wow.
is.
So that's another thing we have in common is our love for just being creative. And I think that's important when you're a prosecutor. I know we'll talk about our professional background in a minute, but I think it's important as a prosecutor that you have those outlets and that you are creative, because basically we are storytellers in a courtroom. We are on a mission to get different people, whether 6, 8, or 10 or 12, in that box to understand where we're coming from, to be empathetic and sympathetic, but to understand a story and digest it the way we want them to digest it. So it's important that we're creative. But my love for the arts is I say that it is also an outlet. So it allowed me to go places that I've never dreamed of outside of my hometown of New Orleans. And in 1999, I moved away. I met my husband in Indianapolis. We have 5 boys. We have 4 that's home with us, and we have built our life to, raise our kids in enjoying the arts, enjoying sports, enjoying the outdoors. So currently, I live in California, Northern California, right outside of Davis, California. So let's talk to the listeners a little bit
Awesome.
about our professional background. Why do we think we are best suited to talk to our listeners about these cases based on our professional background?
Well, you made me think about when you were talking about your side
Yeah.
hustle as a kid. I had a side hustle besides the babysitting and all that. I would make Christmas decorations and walk around the neighborhood and
Nice.
sell them. At the same time, I also was very fascinated with crime and wanting
Yeah.
to help people. I think the arts, which have always been a part of my life, music and art and theater. I was in musicals in high
Nice.
school, and then when I got pregnant, I was going to do theater, graduate with a theater degree, be a director, and that's when I got pregnant. And I thought that didn't seem like a very serious profession if I was maybe going to have to support myself and a child. But I've always been very indignant and rebellious about other people's misfortune and wanting to stand up for underdogs. And so that informed my passions when I decided to go to law school. I wanted to pursue civil rights for women and
Nice.
children. That was the reason kind of I thought law sounded great and a steady job, and that I could help people that maybe couldn't help themselves and stand up for themselves. And being a young mother and struggling through when I went to law school, I had a 3-year-old and I worked full time and I still graduated cum laude. And so I felt like I could identify with the struggle and to push back against the man, if you will, right? The government. But I actually ended up being in the government because that there was where I lived at the time, which was in Houston. There I didn't really see an avenue to pursue civil rights at that time, so I figured I would put that off. And being a prosecutor seemed like a great avenue to pursue those same passions, fighting for women and children, or the underdog, people, the downtrodden, people who are taken advantage of and hurt, and stand up for them and advocate for them. I interned at the DA's office, got a job working at the DA's office while I was in law school, and they offered me a pre-commit position. So as soon as I took the bar, I started working and hoped that I would pass, which I did, and became a prosecutor. And that started my career. How did you get into
Well, one of the things
prosecution?
so one of the things you were saying about the fact that, as an artist, when you got pregnant, you had to really look at, how do I support myself? The school that I went to, New Orleans Center for Creative Arts, most of the students that I went to school with, they are either playwrights, they are directors, they are doing really well for themselves. They are Grammy winners. So I was so lucky to rub shoulders with those individuals. But at the same time, they were starving artists before they actually made it to where they are today. And I had been starving all my life, Jana, figuratively, right? So I said, I
Yes.
cannot,
Right.
I cannot go this route of moving to New York and really chasing my dream, because I always knew that education was the out. And so I had a aunt who, we'll talk about her later in this podcast, who was killed by a family member, but she would always tell me, Suwana, you're going to be a lawyer. Suwana, you're going to be a lawyer. And I remember the only lawyer that I saw that looked like me was Claire Huxtable. And when I saw her, I was like, oh, she's witty, she's smart. I can be her. But I didn't have the roadmap, right? None of my family members were attorneys. No one that I knew worked in a judicial system. And my mom said, if you want to be a lawyer, you have to hang around them. And guess what? I didn't have a way to know how to hang around them. So what I did was I started to watch them on TV. So I would watch Ben Matlock, Perry Mason. I know some of our younger listeners are like, who? I would watch shows. I would watch, you know, right.
Yeah.
They're like, who are these people? Google it,
Look at that.
uh, or TikTok it. But I would watch those individuals on my show on TV, and it inspired me. And then, later on I watched who is one of my favorite, Marissa Haggerty, on Law and Order. And I said, I can do this. And though I was a late law student in life, because I went the traditional route to get my bachelor's degree after working in corporate world for a number of years. I decided to go back to law school. At this point, I was married. A moment ago, when I was talking about my personal background, you heard me say I had 5 kids. And while I was in law school, I had a kid, and he is now in heaven. And my husband, because of that, I originally had a job to go into a corporate job. But there was something that was just nagging on me to go into criminal law. Never thought I would be a criminal lawyer. You asked me 20 years ago, I would say, no, I'm not. No, I'm not doing that. But what I realized when I look back now, and what we intend to share throughout this show, is that my whole life and every experience that I went through, whether it was my brother being killed and the prosecutor who prosecuted that case, the prosecutors who I've seen throughout my life, and because of where I was from, they treated me a certain way, which was not a great way. That I thought, they just treated me as a statistics. And in my mind, when I look back, when I was in a DA's office with you, there were several times where I said, I am so honored to be in this position, because it gives me an opportunity to be the voice for people who come from where I come from. Because maybe 20 years ago, I could have been that kid that was with the wrong kids, smoking pot or stealing, and just been discounted and not given an opportunity. So I try to look for opportunities by telling other prosecutors, hey, don't discount this person. Is there a diversion plan this person can get into? Is this really the intent, or was it the situation that put this young person in the position that he stands in front of us now? And because we have that power of being prosecutors, that prosecutorial discretion, is this the case we want to send this person away? No. And so now I'm honored that I'm in this field. But of course, this was not the field that I kind of chose. I feel like it chose me, and I'm happy that it did. And so when I lost the opportunity to go into the corporate world, because of the pregnancy at that time, losing my child, I had to take off a little bit. When I came back, I went to the DA's office. I literally called one of the DAs at that time and was like, hey, is it possible for me to get an interview? And I got an interview off schedule, I believe. And I'm really appreciative to her for allowing me to do that. And when I came in, they asked me to do a closing argument. I did. They hammered me with a ton of questions about all my business I didn't know that they had. Because listeners, what you may not know is that you get a full background check done on you when you're selected to work at the prosecutor's office. I did not know that. So they asked me a lot of information about my past. They asked me about my brother and him being killed. And so that's how I became a prosecutor. And as you know, we'll talk about it in a minute. when I met you, after working with you for a few years, I decided to go and serve our country. And so now I am a JAG in the United States Air Force. And just so that everyone knows, all of our views are our own and are not contributed to our employers nor the United States government. Just had to put that tad bit in there. Jana, back.
Absolutely. Well, Stawana, how did you pick the Harris County District Attorney's Office or Houston?
Right. So I went to law school at Thurgood Marshall School of Law. I graduated summa cum laude. I believe I was number 3 in my class. I think I could have been number 1 if I didn't have my baby, but that's another story, you know. So anyway, it really doesn't matter because a degree is a degree. We lived in Houston because I did Thurgood Marshall gave me an opportunity. Shout out to the HBCUs out there. I am not a traditional law student. When you go into law school, you have to write a personal statement. And I'll talk about that later on in the podcast. But pretty much no other school was really looking at me because of the fact that I was a older student, and that my LSAT scores at the time didn't line up. And when I applied to Thurgood, they gave me a full scholarship and I made mostly straight A's. And after that, my first semester, other schools came calling for me because they wanted to, right? And though I had an opportunity to go to a top 15 school after my first semester at Thurgood, I said, no way, you didn't want me then? Don't want me now. So I didn't do I chose to stay in Houston rather go to some other city like Austin. But yeah, I finished school in Houston and I decided to make Houston my home. And I knew Houston, Harris County was the DA's office. It did not look like me though. At the time, it was mostly Republican ran, and I loved our DA at the time. Loved her. Loved her husband, who was the DA before her. However, the office was very it wasn't as diverse as it could have been. And so I'm the type of person, Jana, that when I see something is not as diverse as I would like it, I say, like how my kids would say, Mom, be the change. So I wanted to be the change. I said, I'm going to go to the Houston DA's office. They will hire me and I will bring change by way of just being myself authentically and making sure that when I'm talking to victims, they feel represented. Because I've been a victim before, right? And when I'm talking to other law enforcement officials or decision makers, that they hear each side, because they may not have the necessary knowledge to make a decision based on not being able to connect with a certain group of people. And I wanted to make sure that I made that connection, which is funny, Jana, because I'll never forget one time I was in court and a young man, African American male, he was young and he was facing burglary charges, and his mother and father, I think I told you about this at the time actually, came in and they were like pigs and they were talking about me. Oh, how can you, they were mad, like the government, the man, and you're a black woman, you're a
Mm-hmm.
sister, and you're looking at this young man like that. And I turned to her, and I said, ma'am, you should be happy that I'm a part of the government because I'm able to give a different side. After
Right. You can be a part of
correct,
changing it.
absolutely. Don't just assume that I'm
Right.
coming to bring the hammer because, as you know, we take an oath to do justice. Justice doesn't always mean a hammer. Justice sometimes mean dismiss a case or something else. So, I'm happy that I chose Houston because it was the biggest and I felt like it needed to be more diverse. And I wanted to make sure that I joined a organization that was different. I knew it was Republican and I wanted to go into there to make sure, because I always feel like there's always two sides of everything and it doesn't matter where you stand on the fence, there's somewhere we can meet in the middle. And I wanted to make sure I did that.
What year was it that you
It
joined
was
the office?
2015 because I think you came
Okay.
in 2018, right? Or was it 2017?
20 March
Okay, so
2017 is
okay,
when
so
I
I think it
started.
was either 2015 or 2016. I have the don't quote me on that. But when you came in by way of the office changing. A new DA was elected. So at that time, the new DA came in. She was Democratic candidate, and she ran on a platform about Jenny's Law, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But basically, during that time, a rape victim was in prison over the weekend to make sure that she testified because she was homeless. And so that was a hard call, right? For the prosecutors, I'm sure it was a hard call for them to make that decision and do that. In their mind, they thought they were doing the right thing because this victim was hard to locate. She was hard to find, and they wanted to make sure that she would be available since she was homeless on Monday when the trial resumed, because this rapist was a serial rapist. And however, I don't feel one way or the other on it, right? I always try, and I'm sure you do the same, Jonna. When other prosecutors make decisions, unless it's 100% wrong, I don't really have a comment on it because you're not privy to all of the things that they had to consider when making that decision. What do you feel about that?
I think that there are always a lot of considerations when you make a decision on a case. As well, you should uh, consider so many different things in order to make the right decision, because every case should be standing on its own merits or facts. So you can decide what is the right thing. Like for the gentleman that and his family that you saw in the courtroom, what was the right thing to do should not be based
Right.
upon race. It should be based upon good, solid, factual information and the law. So I hesitate to say another prosecutor did something wrong. And I'll give an opinion with the
Yes.
caveat that I don't know everything. There could be some things I don't know. Because a lot of times prosecutors talk to people and they're told things and that may not be recorded somewhere. So it's hard to say. I think the issue with Ginny, that situation, that I think she ended up in jail for a long period of time, even though it was supposed to only be for the weekend. So there have been times in the past where I've been involved with cases where the victim was detained, but only
Right.
for that day and released. And if she, chose to testify, then she testified. Otherwise, she walked out. And I say she because I think there were all situations in which they were women. But I've also detained on many occasions witnesses who refused to come and testify. But again, I don't think it was more than just for the day. But I think the problem with the situation had happened over a long period of time. Now, that said, again, I don't know all the
Right.
facts or circumstances surrounding that particular case. And so I would hesitate to make any like real hard
Right.
fast opinion on that. But I will say that the positive thing, and I think this is positive, maybe it's resulted in people not being held accountable, but I have never since that time asked for a victim to be
Mm.
detained since that case
Wow.
occurred. It hit the news and all of that. So not since then. So good or bad, I don't know. Maybe it depends on your
Mhm.
perspective. But if a victim won't come testify, then my next question is, can I or can you, if I'm supervising someone as a prosecutor, can you prove it without her?
Absolutely.
And if you can't, then that's a dismissal. So, you know, that's happened a lot.
Absolutely. It happens so many times. And so, as a result of that case, I knew the prosecutors involved in that case really well. I have a high regard for them. I don't know whether it was the right decision or bad decision. Like Jonna said, I just don't comment on it because, like you said, there's so many factors that go into that. It is unfortunate that she was detained as long as she was. But as a result of that, I think the public was outraged, and it was in the news. And as a result of that, and other things, Kim Ogg was elected as the DA. So at that time, I was a misdemeanor prosecutor. And I was working in sex crimes. I worked under Ann Johnson, who's now a House representative. She was great, learned a ton from her. Joanne came in, music, and she was great as well. And I believe she brought you in. Did she bring you in, Jonna?
I had reached out to her. So up to this point, and from like 96 to 2001, I was a prosecutor at the Harris County District Attorney's Office, tried many, many cases, robberies, murders, child sex crimes. I was actually in the child abuse division when I left the office to do defense work, which I did for 7 years, representing defendants, helping persons who were mentally ill or drug addicted and helping their families. Tried several cases as a defense attorney. And then I really missed being a prosecutor, went back into prosecution. And the end of 2008, I was in Victoria County and in charge of a district court. I became first assistant a couple of years in, did that for several years until 2017, which is when my younger son and I, because I have two boys, my oldest, which he's about to be 35, and then my younger son
Great.
is, thank you, thank you, I
You
appreciate
know the
that.
listeners did the
Um,
math. You told them how old you were when you got pregnant, so they did the math.
right, right on, right on. I know it's like time marches on; it goes by
Absolutely.
fast. So my younger son is 18, and he was in need. He's a musician. We had kind of, Victoria's kind of small, so like 100,000 people. So we had kind of maxed out on his abilities to grow as a musician in Victoria and moved back to Houston. And reached out to Joanne Music, who was the head of sex crimes, saying, hey, I have a lot of experience, because up to this point, I probably had tried 95 or more cases, felony first chair cases, where I was the lead attorney, and then just, numerous misdemeanor cases. So the majority of my trials have been violent crimes, crimes against women or children, and many minority crimes. And I was very interested in, I heard they had an opening in trafficking because Ann Johnson had been sent back to trial bureau. She was the chief of the trafficking division, had been sent back to trial bureau, um, to a district court. And so they had an opening. They needed somebody to handle trafficking. And word was, nobody wants to go and talk to prostitutes. That's that's
Wow.
exactly what I heard from multiple people. So no, they couldn't get anybody to take over that section. And then they also needed someone for child exploitation. So I reached out and said, hey, I'm interested. I've had some experience dealing with prostitution related crimes, sex traffickers in Victoria, because the booming gas business brought a lot of prostitution criminal activity to that area where I was working in Victoria, which is south of 2 hours south of Houston. And so I was offered a job and started up in charge of the trafficking and child exploitation sections. Later was given the adult sex crimes as well, made its own division, and was a division chief for several years. So when I was there, that's how you and I
Absolutely.
met, which was amazing and life-changing for me. You are a powerhouse and a changer and a mover and a shaker and amazing
And
woman.
so are you. And I think that's where we're related. But if I must be honest, I have to tell the listeners about what I first thought of you when I first met you. So you have to understand what our office was going through. A lot of our good friends, people that we admire, with a whole lot of experience, were losing their jobs, right? They were being relieved based on a change in the DA's office. We were afraid because we didn't know, like, what did all of this change bring, because at the time we were under Devin Anderson, loved her, really had a lot of respect for her. She was very personable, and so I thought, oof, what is this going to be like? So when you came in, I didn't know what to expect, but when I first saw you, I was like, she's cute. And it's hard because you're such a beautiful woman that, if I'm being honest, the majority of prosecutors that I had met up until that point that were beautiful, that was all that it was. There was no substance behind it. There was no hustle. There was no understanding or empathy or anything like that. no story. And so when I saw you, what I always tell people when I describe Jonna and I talk about, like, this is my chief, I love her to death, is that when I first met you and you were beautiful, you dressed much differently than most of, everybody else would be so stuffy. And Jonna came in with a little bit of color. Instead of the blue and black, she had a pop of color or some nice high heels. But what I was really impressed with was that she always had case law. I was in trial with Jonna Stallings one time. And while we're in trial, this expert who is suave and gorgeous and just taking the juror's breath away. I mean, one juror literally said that he took her breath away. Like, he was so good when he testified and so smooth. And he was testifying on behalf of the defendant in the case. I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is mitigating. This is hurting our case." And Jonna is just sitting so calm and she's just reading and looking and nothing, right? I'm looking at her like, "Do we have this? Has something changed? Is the battle?
You got
Are we
this or
going on?
what?
What's going on?" Jonna coolly got up. Well, actually, we sit at the table when we ask questions, but I think she got up to retrieve something from the bench and talk to question this expert. And he is a well known, very popular, very effective expert. And when she broke him down with just the questions and things, sometimes prosecutors, we tailor our questions to what we know the law says. So we'll ask a certain question laced with certain words because we know the legal ramifications of it. And when she did that, it was so effective that when we took a break and the expert got off the stand, he literally came to us and he was flushed. Like, he was red and flushed. And he was like, "That is the best cross exam that was ever done on me ever." And at that point, I knew that Jonna was that woman. Anytime I'm in trial, I would be like, "Jonna, I'm dealing with this case and this issue." She's like, "Rules of evidence, such and such and such. Have you looked at this case?" She'll send me like 5 cases within the course of 10 minutes. And I was like, that is the prosecutor that I want to be. I want to be able to, people misjudge me because I feel like you're misjudged sometimes. Any woman, most times we're misjudged, right? Being an African American woman, I can attest to being, maybe I'm too loud, maybe I'm too aggressive, maybe all of these things that you can be misjudged about. Jonna talked about being a mother at 20 years old. I'm sure what kind of judgment comes with that. So we're used to being judged and counted out and set aside and looked over, which is one of the reasons why, we feel like we're well suited for this show and why we're passionate about it. But based on when I saw that, oh, this woman is a woman, like she comes and she stands on substance, then I knew that this is somebody that's going to be my friend for life. And she literally was someone, even when I went off to serve in the military, I would call her and ask her, "Hey, Jonna, what do you think about this?" Because she is one of the smartest, not only beautiful spirit, but so smart and just gets it. And I really respect that. One more quick story, Jonna, about Jonna. Hopefully, I'm not embarrassing you over there. But it is. I literally have learned so much from her, and one of the best things she ever told me. And I always tell people this. I literally recently told a senior leader in my office this when they asked me how you're able to do what you do. I was talking. We had a prostitution case, which all of our cases at one point were prostitution. I think we've spoken to hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of prostitutes, right? Victims and cases. During this particular case, the pimp it was that plea that I did. We were going to go to court. I had a plea. And a plea deal is basically he decided instead of facing trial that he would plead to something that we both could agree on, and that's the government and the defense. So he went up in front of the judge and he was going to plea after I did like this motion hearing. And when afterwards he told his counsel that he wanted to talk to me, and he was like, "Thank you." This was the pimp. "Thank you. I want to see that prosecutor." And he was just like, "Thank you. Thank you for being decent." You didn't have to do that. And so when I told Jonna that, she gave me the best advice that I ever heard. She was like, hey, remember when you're meeting these people, you're meeting them on one of the worst days of their life. It's possibly one of the worst days of their life. It's possibly, this is the worst thing that they've ever done in life, but they are still a person. They're still a human being, and they're still somebody's child. Somebody still cares for them. And maybe there's still something there that's redeemable. So when you treat people, when you're in court, you treat them with respect. Now, one caveat to that: if I'm dealing with a case with a pedophile or a child case when somebody has done something horrible, I do not treat them like a human because their behavior is inhumane. So I think we can both agree on there's a limit to where that goes, but I definitely took that to heart to make sure that I'm being respectful and make sure that when I have a case that requires me to determine based on the evidence whether this person really did something, I walk with caution, right? Like if I don't know whether this evidence prove it, then I'm not going to label this person as a predator or use those words that I know are will really pull at the member's heart. So I really appreciate that advice, Shauna. It has stuck with me. I don't even know if you remember giving it to me, but it has literally changed my outlook when I deal with people and when I try these cases. And because of it, I can sleep well at night because I know that I'm doing justice and being fair and listening and not just counting someone out, especially when you know what it feels like to be counted out.
Yeah, I think that the other part of that is even when you do have someone who did do a horrible thing, there's no, when you're in the courtroom, you're still, respectful, and there's no
Right.
glee taken from, now there's
Absolutely.
satisfaction, but, for sure. But, but still maintaining your professionalism and your own code of moral conduct, because you walk away knowing you did the right thing, and, the world is going to be safer because of what you did. There's also a time for um, giving, a chance or doing something that, will allow that person to maybe move forward and do better. I know there was a time that I was stopped in the street. There were some guys that were, I may have told you this story, I'm not sure, but because it kind of relates to what you're talking about. There were some guys, had those big jackhammers, and they were working, and they were being supervised by African American guy, big tall guy. He saw me, and he motioned to the other guys that he would be right back, and he came over and he stopped me. He said, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I was like, "Sure." I was walking to my car. It was like, I don't know, noon or something. I left court, and he said, "Do you remember that trial? It's a drug case, and guy was on deferred adjudication in another county, and you convicted me. That was me. You convicted me for a state jail, and you asked for the maximum, and they gave it, of 2 years." And I said, "That was you. How are you doing?" And he said, "I want to thank you. I've been watching for you for a long time. I wanted to thank you. I started my own construction company. I sat there for 2 years and thought every day about what happened. And, I realized that you were right and the things you said were right." And I'm like, "Congratulations. That's amazing. I'm glad that you're doing well." So, sometimes good things can happen out of a really bad situation in the
I agree.
courtroom.
And to keep it even more real, I have a personal family member that was just released from prison after spending I believe it's more than 20 years in jail, and he was falsely accused. But at the time, I'm pretty sure those prosecutors thought that the evidence said that he did it, right? And the way he was,
Mhm.
he actually, and we'll talk about this later in the podcast, the Innocence Project, or one that's similar to it, found out that there was a witness that had lied, and that witness was the key witness to his freedom. but he would have to spend more time in prison before this witness came back to Louisiana, to give her statement and everything like that. And it would be a long process. His mother, who's my aunt, was sick, and he said, the prosecutors are offering me a deal where I could just plead. I don't care anymore. I just want to get out of here. And he didn't want to wait. And so he decided to take the plea to get out of jail after spending so much time, even though they had evidence that was possibly going to exonerate him, right? And so, like you
Yeah.
said, sometimes we put people away and the evidence said that they did it and they did it. Sometimes we put people away and the evidence said that they did it and they didn't. And so you're so right. I've never been at the end of a trial where I'm like, giddy. I'm so happy because there is real consequences and people that are affected by this, right? Not only is the victim affected, but the defendant's family is also affected, right? Especially if it's a close related type crime, and if it's not, no one in the family member, no mother, being a mother of four boys myself, I couldn't imagine. So you have to be mindful of the heavy crown that you wear as a prosecutor, that you are respectful and that you are diligent in your job to make sure that you are not working with tunnel vision, and that you are making sure that you are turning over anything that's exculpatory. Because a part of that, Jonna, is when I talk about exculpatory, just brought back to my memory. In law school, I worked as a legislative aide for Senator Rodney Ellis, who is now the commissioner there in Houston, and one of the commissioners. And I worked during a time when Michael Martin, he was working on that legislation. So I worked out of that office. I touched some of that legislation. And I met Michael Martin. I met several exonerees because that's one of Ellis, that was his at the time, some of the legislation that he really pushed. And meeting those people and hearing their stories, I might have would have thought they were guilty too at the time. And so just to see that they were not, and how they were affected, how their families were affected, it's so important to be respectful. So you never know who's watching you. And because I carry myself that way, recently talking about memorable experiences, I had a situation recently where the mother of the accused actually saw me, and she saw me and she was like, I have to be honest with you. You are the reason why my son is going to be put away. And I stopped for a moment because she caught me in a restroom, and I didn't know where she was going to go with this, right? And she's like, but it's not just because of what you're saying, is how you're saying it. And I appreciate the fact that you're being very respectful, and you didn't have to do that. She said, I see how intentional you are, and your closing took my breath away. And I was like, well, if his mama think he's about to get a guilty, this is gonna be a guilty. That's what I thought in my mind. I'm like, members. We call our jurors members. But when she told me that, I did think, well, if she was that impacted, I'm sure my members were impacted. But I didn't. I was like, I'm so sorry that we met under these circumstances, and I wish the very best for your family, because I do. I truly do. Even when I talk to, sometimes I get these cases, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is horrible. This is horrible that this person was in a situation. This is horrible that it's happening. It's not a win-win for anyone. It's not. And so it is a heavy crown to carry. But when you do it with respect, I think that's what really sets you apart as a prosecutor, and take you out of being, I got to get it, I got to get this guilty. It's not about the guilty. I have to get what's just. And sometimes that's a guilty, and sometimes it's not a guilty. It just depends.
And it does impact multiple, at least two families, the family of the victim and the defendant. I've had situations where the victim and the victim's family is very upset because I'm not filing charges, or because I'm dismissing it, because it's the right thing. And it's extremely important and difficult to do the right thing, because people get upset, and you have to you are accountable to the public, you are accountable to the victim, but you are also accountable to the person charged or the suspect of a case. And we need just to make sure that the right thing happens as prosecutors. And it's a tough job. And you and I had talked before about supervisors not training prosecutors to have the strength to do that, the knowledge and the strength to do the right thing. Whether it's go to trial and fight for the victim, or dismiss the case, or not file the charge because the defendant maybe didn't do it, or because it's the right thing to do for whatever reason. I can see that your closing argument would take someone's breath away, since I've seen you argue, and your first felony opening statement ever took my breath away, and which is in the Turley case, which we're going to talk about next time, which involved an African American child who was the victim, and very important case to both of us. And you gave the opening statement, and you came out giving the opening statement like a bolt of lightning out of the sky. And it was amazing, and you are amazing. So I don't doubt that you're giving closing arguments that take someone's breath away. All of these things that we've been talking about just make me think about the fact when I go to court, I've always wanted to be the prosecutor who wasn't just pushing paper or files, just on to the next thing or whatever. I've always wanted to be that prosecutor who reviewed everything, truly advocated, and truly made sure that the right thing happened, because the cases were so important to me. To be that person I would want if a family member was hurt, so. And I know that you feel the same way. It's not just a paper pushing job to you
Yeah.
either. Even though I'm not with you right now, but I still,
Yeah, you think about it.
think like that. But right, for sure. And of course, the same goes for when you do defense. It's not just a paper pushing and whatever. I want to make sure that this person's taken care of and their family understands what's going on, and I help them with any resources and things like that. And as a prosecutor, dealt with both victims and defendants, because we worked in the trafficking arena, where a lot of victims are also charged with criminal offenses. We did a lot of interviewing when you and I worked together of persons who were engaged in prostitution, also charged with, the prostitution selling, and were also victims. Important to advocate. That's its own brand of advocating, and very difficult. But so those persons are so worthy of passion and advocacy on the part of prosecution. And the majority of my victims over the years have been African American.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't surprise
And
it doesn't surprise me, right?
yeah.
Like most of the time, the reason why and what makes it so hard for us as prosecutors to really get our members, well, in the case of the civilian world, our jurors on board to understand that this person matters. And when you talk about a prostitute, right, the first thing we know is that jurors are going to be thinking, well, she put herself in this situation. She must have wanted it. It was something that she was doing, right? And it really and truly, the whole reason why an offender chooses the victim. And that's important to understand, that the defendant is the one that chooses the victim and chooses the crime. And they do that based on the fact of understanding that there will be people who do not care, right? They do that because they understand this victim is susceptible to this based on their living situation, their financial situation, their background, the fact that, there's studies that say that sex sellers or there's so many things out there that's derogatory to people who are prostitutes, right? There's so many derogatory things. If I can be honest with you, as an African American woman, I always say that the person that's least protected is an African American woman. And so if someone knows, a defendant knows that maybe there's no value that's seen, like someone may not think I'm valuable or believable, then they can choose me as a victim. And I can, there have been times, though I have a suit on and I'm in court, a bailiff may ask me, why am I there? And I literally have had to pull out my bar card, though I have my suit on and I am dressed this way. So just imagine a regular person coming off the street, right? Matter of fact, the way that I look, sometimes I've changed. I don't wear hoodies or I don't wear certain street clothes because I've also, even as an attorney, even as a professional who has a great job, even as a service member, have been looked upon when I'm in certain environments as having no worth. And what I mean by that is an officer may talk to me like I am just some criminal on the street. And then when I open my mouth and say, what's your PC? They really realize that puts a check on them to know, what does she know about PC? Because I'm waiting for you to tell me something, but at the same time being respectful because I know that I don't get the same privilege of, oh, this was just a misunderstanding. I know from television and the public that this can turn really bad. And so even me as an attorney, if I feel like, hey, there are times where I'm not being heard, even with having a bar card, even with being a professional, even with being a homeowner, just imagine someone that's a prostitute. How much more do you think they feel like someone won't listen to them? I don't have a criminal record and I'm apprehensive sometimes about my interactions with certain law enforcement officers. Not all of them. I've worked with them, right? I currently work with them and there are good people everywhere. But I
Mhm.
always am very careful about how I'm projected to make sure I'm protected. And that's just the reality that I live in. And so it makes me look at, what the reason why we can talk to uh, those prostitutes who were actually victims in most of those cases was because, like you said, we both have been discounted. And that's why we're doing this podcast, because we know what it's like, not only from our personal experiences, but we also know what it's like based on our profession. We've seen it on a personal side and we've seen it on a professional side, that there are a certain set of people, marginalized individuals, whether it's Black women who are considered to have grown up on the wrong side of the track, LGBTQ community. We have seen people who are marginalized, who our society may say they're the outliners, outcasters, that they sometimes don't have a voice. And when they find it, that's the sad part. When they find their voice, sometimes there are people in law enforcement, there are prosecutors who don't listen. And we knew how important that was, Jana, which is why I think that's the reason why you did that training with all of those law enforcement officers, to teach them why a prostitute may be apprehensive to telling you, like, hey, this man who I'm in a car with is my pimp and he is going to kill me if I say anything, because they're afraid of being arrested. And I thought that training that you did was just amazing, where we were able to talk about the case that you're going to highlight next week. And we were able to talk about how law enforcement should approach individuals from marginalized backgrounds and communities, and how they should interact and why they receive the pushback sometimes. And so another part of that is just make sure that, when I talk about my cousin and the fact that years passed before this witness came forward, right? Years may have passed for some of these cases. Maybe we're featuring a case, maybe we haven't even talked about it, maybe you haven't thought about it in years and you know something. Email us, leave a voicemail on our website, and let us know. Because as I said, people, everyone deserves to be treated fairly. They deserve the protection of the law and they deserve to be heard. So we are the voice for the voiceless. I mean, I think that's our calling, Jana. I think that's what we were put here to do, just hearing about our background and our personal and professional side. I feel like we have this charge to do this and to manifest this. And I'm glad that we did, because it's been a long time coming. It's been a long time coming for us to do this. Our lives came in a way. Me getting pregnant several times again and again have come in a way. business have come in a way, and now we're finally able to do this, and I'm excited for it.
I'm thrilled. I feel like we can use our investigative, our interviewing, our prosecutorial skills that we have honed and developed over the years. And we know how to dig and get information. And I would love to put our fresh, hungry eyes on some cold cases involving, persons that were abused, murdered, or missing, who LGBT, transgender, African Americans, Native Americans. There are so many cases out there that I feel like we all, you and I, with the public, can really try to shine a light on crimes that have been swept under the rug, and we're not afraid to do it, and we're passionate about it as well.
We're definitely not afraid to do it. And in addition to, putting our hungry eyes, I love how you describe that, on those cold cases, we will also educate our listeners. Like, we are not just prosecutors, we are women, right? But we're very intuitive. I think that's what kind of make us really well suited, putting our background together, the fact that we're intuitive, the fact that we've tried all of these cases, the fact that we've interviewed hundreds of people in prostitution, human trafficking cases, we've interviewed pimps, the fact that we've interviewed child molesters, pedophiles, seen all of this material that most people wouldn't want to see. And we know that there are certain common things, common reasons why certain people are targeted. And we also know that sometimes there is no reason. However, there's things that you can do, right? To better help us solve these crimes. So with that being said, we are also here to talk about cases, to give you advice about when you're going through something and know that you're being heard, to give our listeners advice about, hey, don't let your kid always called every man that they know uncle and sit on their lap. Just things that you think that most people know. That school teacher that's extra interested in your kid. Dig into that. See why that is. Don't use words like pajamas when you're describing the anatomy of a woman to your child. Say vagina, say the proper word, say penis. Because when your child has to give a statement, if unfortunately they ever become a victim of this type of crime, you don't want them to be confused about what happened to them. You want them to know that they can trust you and come forward. So all of these things, based on our experiences that we've been involved in firsthand, I think it's going to be insightful to our listeners to hear our perspective and to get just tips along the way. And in addition to going into the cold cases, we're also going to discuss some of the cases that we've prosecuted, why we think that it didn't get the media attention that it deserved, as well as talk about some hot topics, because there's some hot topics in the news as it relates to marginalized communities. And we want to really go and dig into that and bring attention to it, because maybe one of our listeners, just maybe, may give that tip to help solve a crime. And so we are here for it, looking forward to it. And what is the reason why you wanted to do this, Jana?
I wanted to provide exposure to these cases for the victims to know that someone cares, that someone's still looking into it, and maybe who's an offender, and help put someone behind bars that needs to be there, who thinks it was swept under the rug, that nobody's going to know. And also to highlight some of the cases from the past, whether it's ours that we tried or other cases, and digest those and break them down, and let those victims know they're not forgotten, and the offender to know, we're still talking about it. You're still being exposed. So I think that's important. That's why I wanted to do it, and to utilize my skills with you in a scenario where we could still do some good.
I like that. Before we let our listeners go, we want to just share a memorable story from our time as prosecutors. So I'll kick this off, Jonna. I had a case, and it's funny because two people in the case are now sitting judge. The assistant trial counsel that I tried the case with is now a current judge in Harris County. And the defense attorney, I believe this was her first case as a public defender. And she's a judge now in Harris County as well. And what's interesting about that case was that when I got on the case like 2 days before. I think I called you because I was freaking out, like, okay. I got on the case, something happened 2 days before. She said, "Hey, I want you to try this case for me. I need you to jump on." And the case did not involve any physical evidence. It was a little girl who had accused her father of sexual assaulting her and raping her. And she was 13 years old. She had a twin and she had another sister. Now, this case was especially difficult because none of the other kids were abused. But when I talked to the little girl, she was within her shell. She wore glasses. She was very shy. She's like, "How do we put her on the stand?" She's saying she doesn't want to participate. The defense is coming back with a plea. The plea was for 5 years. I said, talking to this little girl and looking through these medical records, I don't necessarily think we should take a plea. I think she should go forward. Now, usually, sometimes I might talk myself out of that because looking at the victim and how she'll do on a stand, I might be thinking maybe we do this. But the part that really, maybe we take the plea. The part that really bothered me was that the little girl had a developmental delay when she was a little girl, and she had an auditory problem. So for me, if he did indeed do this, I felt like it was egregious because I felt like he played on the fact that she was developmentally delayed and she couldn't hear properly. And so I went through those medical records and I say, what I do see in the medical records is that the mom is always saying something is wrong with my kids at different stages in this child's life, and lined up with the times where this little girl said that her father was raping her. And so I said, I think this is enough corroborating evidence, especially with the fact that the little girl told one of her friends what was going on, that it will help us win this case. So I really had to go through those records. But that's not even the most memorable part to me. What's memorable to me about the case was we put on the case. We were super nervous. We didn't know that we were going to get the guilty. We got the guilty. Then I argued. Now, when we got the guilty, and we told the little girl, her appearance totally changed. She went from being inward to outward. She had a big smile on her face. And that concerned me because I didn't want the jurors to think because she's relieved that he has a guilty that their job was done. Because as you know, the job is not done. We need to now focus on a sentencing piece. So what was memorable is that she, from the time this trial went on and the time she met the assistant DA that I was working with, she had drawn a painting, and the painting was a bird, and the bird had little crepe type paper covering the bird's private part. But it was a beautiful painting, so it was known that she's gonna be a great artist, right? And so I saw this and I asked her, I said, "What is this for? Why are you covering the bird here?" And she said, "Because I want the bird to always feel safe and to have this protection." That blew me away because I'm like, oh my God, even after this guilty, even after everything that happened to her, she still is concerned enough that she would cover a bird's private part so that bird can be safe. So it impacted me, and I wanted to impact the jurors. But as you could imagine, there are certain rules, and I may not be able to get this painting in. But what I did know was if I looked at it and on first blush, you just think, this is a beautiful painting. This is mitigating. This means that this little girl is going to be all right. I flaunted that among the defense. I came in and the senior defense counsel, not judge at the time, another senior defense counsel with the public defender's office. She was like, "Can I borrow this?" Absolutely. had no idea I laid this plot out for her to do this. So in her closing, she's like, she's doing so well. Look at the beautiful painting that she painted for the prosecutors. She's going to do well. Her father shouldn't have to have, this heavy burden and blah, blah, blah. And I came back and I was like, she's doing well, but don't let that fool you because she's well enough to have, you saw her testify now, and you see how she has a light on her face. But what you don't see is that even though she's relieved that she got through this, she still has to go through this. And what that means is that even though there's a guilty, she still is thinking, this is the protection of the bird. Look at this. She put this on the bird so that the bird's private parts are protected. That's impactful. And I just set it there for them to look at. And they gave him life. And if you remember, me and the other prosecutor, we got a commendation from the elected DA at that time because we really didn't have much evidence. As you know, these kind of cases are super hard. Then we're dealing with a little girl it was hard for her to testify. Yeah. And so that stuck with me because I said, sometimes I'm quick to say, not that I'm quick to say, but I'm thinking if a victim is not going to be able to pull it together on a stand, maybe I should be looking at a plea deal. And then it challenged me to say other evidence, because evidence is just not testimony. Evidence is just not DNA evidence. I know that's what we always want. However, evidence is sometimes the things that don't make sense, the things that you can stitch together that corroborates what this person is saying. And so it really put an onus on me to do due diligence to make sure when I'm looking at those cases, I'm looking at everything to really bring it home for the victim.
Yeah, you really comb through it and look
Yeah.
for the details.
What about you, Jonna?
That's amazing, Stawana. I remember that case and you getting life. Those are the toughest cases, no evidence and just a child's testimony. So kudos for that. I guess probably the one of my most memorable, there are several, was a brother and sister who their mother lost custody of them when they were like 10 and 7. The 10-year-old was a boy, the 7-year-old was a girl. And about 4 years after mom lost custody, the brother and sister, the girl was adopted and he was with a foster family, went and told the adoptive mom of the daughter, of the sister, that this guy had been raping them when their mother would take them over to his house. And he was a registered sex offender. He was actually on deferred adjudication at the time that he was molesting them. Their mother had been warned several times to not allow the children over there. So this is a delayed outcry. And they both ended up testifying against the sex offender, and he was sentenced to life. So that was great. After he was found guilty, I sat with the brother, the boy. He was now like 15 at this point, 16, might have been 16. And I said, hey, how do you feel about what your mom did? That your mom, and testimony had come out that mom had been paid by the sex offender to let him babysit for weekends at a time, and that he had told his mom that what this guy was doing to him, and her response was to put medicine on his butt. And so I told him, I said, hey, I kind of think your mom needs to be held accountable for this. And he said, you're right, she does. And I said, would you be okay, testifying and prosecuting, if I filed charges on her. And he said, yeah, I would. So I filed the same charges on her that I filed on the sex offender. And he testified against her, and he testified to horrible things that this guy did, and all the things that she did after she knew that he was being molested, and that this guy had bought his mom a car and given mom money and all these things. And she was sentenced to life in prison. And so I'll never forget that, that testimony. I can still hear some of the things that he was saying, and woke up, crying at like 3 a.m. a few times after I tried those series of cases. But she had never been in trouble before. So it was quite a shock to her to be prosecuted. But it was cool when you talk about going back and digging up evidence. I went through thousands of pages of CPS records and dug up great tidbits of information to corroborate the victims, that this actually was happening to them, and to show circumstantially what mom knew through a variety of medical records and the CPS records and things like that. So he was very happy, and that his mom was punished. And the sister wasn't able to testify against the mom, but he carried the weight for both of them and made sure mom was held accountable. Anyway, that's one of my memorable
I can see
prosecutions.
why, and I can see why you
So
would be waking up crying. And on another episode, we will talk to you all about how we kind of put things in a box and we're able to digest this information so we can try it, but we understand that we also have to let it go so that our families, we can still be a part of our families, and that we can still go on and live productive lives with our families. And that's hard to do. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. So, Jonna, I think that is our time for today. So, we want you to go subscribe so that you are notified when there's new content and there's a new show. You can expect to hear from us every Wednesday. So, we want to get you through your week. And we want to get you through your week, but by making sure that you are aware and that you are listening to the stories that we want to bring to you, that we will do our very best to make sure that we give you quality products that you can listen to and be a part of. We want to make this a consistent show, which is why Wednesday will be the day that we release. Any final words, Jana? Until next, looking
looking
forward
forward
to it.
to this adventure.
Looking forward to the adventure. And I'll say, just like the painting behind you, peace until next time.